On the day of my release, my husband asked for a divorce. He claimed his first love had been waiting for him long enough. I couldn't help but laugh. You still think I was the one who pushed Diana down the stairs 2 years ago? He paused before saying, Diana doesn't blame you anymore. Jennifer, Harvey said in a stern voice. His irritation was clear. Gone were the eyes that once gazed at me tenderly when he was drunk, holding me close and calling my name. A month later, the day I officially assumed control, I held a press conference. The media descended on the venue in droves. I had invited my father, Diana, and her mother, who likely came expecting me to falter after 2 years in prison. They were in for a shock. At the event's conclusion, I released damning evidence of my father's affairs to the public. Within hours, it went viral. The proof was undeniable, and the backlash was immediate. I had lied to him, never actually surrendering the original documents. My mother hadn't been able to finish what she started, but I could. Cheating on his wife, using her assets to fund mistresses and illegitimate children, it was disgusting. Outwardly respectable, but what a despicable man. And to appear at the press conference with the mistress and her daughter, what was his plan? Train the next generation of homewreckers. In no time, stories about my family dominated every news outlet. My father, Diana, and her mother became the subjects of scorn and gossip, their names ridiculed in every casual conversation. The company my father had built saw its stock prices crash overnight. Partners pulled out of deals en masse, citing various excuses and leaving severe penalties in their wake, which crushed him under their weight. This had been my intention all along. What I hadn't anticipated was how fragile my father's network truly was. Decades of business connections disintegrated like sandcastles swept away by the tide. Diana called me repeatedly, venom practically dripping through the phone. By the 30th call, I finally answered. Don't panic, I said. Wait for me at the old house. I wanted to see their faces myself. It had been over 10 years since I'd last set foot in my childhood home. Once warm and elegant, it now stood in ruin, its former grandeur stripped bare. Most of the valuables had likely been claimed by creditors, leaving an empty, lifeless shell. Only Diana and her mother remained, seated amidst the decay. I recalled the day they had driven my mother from this very house, their smug arrogance, their lifted chins. It was all etched in my memory. But now the tables had turned. What are you doing here? Diana's mother hissed, her voice sharp and desperate. Her eyes gleamed with feral intensity. I smiled, taking my time to reply. I just wanted to see how much you two resemble stray dogs, I said calmly. Her body trembled with fury. How fitting. Those were the very words she had once hurled at my mother. I'd always disliked my name. It was plain, easy to overlook, unlike Diana's, which meant goddess of the moon. Everyone adored her. But if she thought she could easily push me out of my marriage, she was wrong. Her beauty had faded. Her hair was streaked with gray, her elegance worn down by the brutal reality of her downfall. Are you satisfied now? Then get out, she screamed, collapsing to the floor, a broken figure. Careful, I said sweetly, mocking her. You might want to take better care of yourself. My father might find you repulsive. Diana rushed toward me, her finger pointing accusingly. Jennifer, you're vile. What do you mean by that? No matter what, she's still your elder. I laughed outright. Vile? Oh, you've got some nerve. Should I remind you of everything you and your mother have done? She lunged at me, but I sidestepped easily. Losing her balance, she slipped and hit her head on the edge of a cabinet. Also, I added coldly, don't flatter yourself. I don't have elders like her. Blood trickled from her forehead, but I felt no pity. Don't bother thanking me for this grand gesture, I said dryly, disdain evident in my tone. Footsteps approached from outside, and Diana scrambled back, crying out. Jennifer, even if you kill me, I won't give him up, she wailed. Tears streamed down her face. I have nothing left. You've taken the company, and now you want everything else. What more do you want? I don't agree to the divorce, I said calmly. I couldn't forget the endless nights in prison, Diana's triumphant smirk, or Harvey's betrayal. Diana had framed me, and Harvey had testified against me. Together, they sent me to prison. Harvey's voice cut through the tension as he entered. His tone softened when he saw Diana. I'll take you to the hospital. Diana's mother grabbed his arm, sobbing theatrically. Harvey, thank goodness you're here. She's taken the company, and now she wants to kill Diana. She's so cruel, so dangerous. Diana collapsed into Harvey's arms, her sobs exaggerated and dramatic. This was their final card to play. Harvey, their ever-loyal protector. You're claiming I hit Diana? Got proof? I sneered, crossing my arms. Harvey, you're incredibly gullible, you know that? Diana clutched her head, crying harder as Harvey glanced at me, doubt clouding his face. I was done with Diana's theatrics. Leaning closer, I smirked and whispered, You're such a good actress, but tell me, how would Harvey feel if he knew it wasn't you who saved him back then? Diana's head snapped up, her face a mask of shock and panic. She hadn't expected him to share that story. Some truths are meant to surface, not to exonerate me, but because they would cut Harvey more deeply than anything else. My father and Diana's family had received their reckoning. It was Harvey's turn to face his. Without another word, I turned and left. Back at home, I began packing my things. I asked Matthew to contact a lawyer. Harvey wanted a divorce? Fine. It was time. As I finished packing, Harvey stormed in. Don't, he said, grabbing my hand. We need to talk. Now, even though I felt nothing for Harvey anymore, I wouldn't let go of what was mine. This marriage would end on my terms. Diana would remain a mistress forever. I pulled away before he could hold on. His face darkened, frustration visible in every feature. Do you hate me that much now? He asked, his voice low, his brow furrowed. Shouldn't you be comforting Diana right now? Why are you here? I shot back, a wry smile on my lips. Oh, by the way, I continued, watching his expression carefully, I've already had my lawyer draft the divorce agreement, the house. Since we bought it after the wedding, the inheritance will be evenly divided. I have no interest in your business or your wealth. His expression grew darker with every word I spoke. Everything will be resolved soon. If you have concerns, feel free to contact my attorney. There was nothing more to discuss. Our relationship had reached its end. Harvey had not anticipated my unwavering resolve. His emotions spiraled out of control, becoming increasingly chaotic. You claimed I'm easy to deceive. What are you hiding from me? He demanded. Finally, he was beginning to piece things together, but I had no intention of providing him with answers. The truth wasn't a gift to hand over. It was a weapon for him to uncover and wield against himself. Without sparing him another glance, I turned and walked away. I had endured my torment long enough. Now it was Harvey's turn to face his. 3 days later, Harvey appeared at my office. His bloodshot eyes and disheveled appearance were a stark contrast to his usual refined demeanor. Raising an eyebrow, I slid the divorce agreement I had prepared across the desk toward him. If there's nothing you want to dispute, just sign it, I said firmly. Harvey's gaze locked onto the document, his voice breaking as he spoke. I'm not signing it, he said through gritted teeth. Jennifer, I won't divorce you. I know everything now. Our conversation was cut short by a phone call. I knew it was from Diana. She couldn't wait for Harvey to divorce me, even on the day of my release. Her desperation was unsurprising. That's who she had always been, coveting everything I cared about. His voice trembled and his breathing became uneven. I investigated the study tour. I found the doctor who treated me. He remembered me, and when I showed him pictures of you and Diana, he said, I interrupted, my smile icy and cold. And I know about the child I lost in prison, I said casually. His voice faltered. You know you're the one who killed our child, don't you? My words sliced through the room like a blade. A faint smile played on my lips, my tone almost breezy. If you've uncovered the truth, how can you still have the nerve to refuse the divorce? I refuse to remain married to the man responsible for our child's death. Harvey froze, the weight of my accusation crushing him. His fingers clenched the divorce papers so tightly they crumpled, as though the document was the only thing keeping him standing. After a few agonizing seconds, he stumbled out of the office in a panic. His retreat was clumsy and pathetic. 2 weeks passed, and during that time, Harvey kept his distance. Matthew informed me that he was refusing to sign the divorce agreement. I wasn't concerned. I instructed my lawyer to warn him that if he continued to delay, I would pursue legal action. Meanwhile, I focused on my health. A follow-up medical appointment had resulted in the doctor recommending a hospital stay for treatment. One day, as I was leaving work through the underground parking lot, Harvey confronted me again. His appearance shocked me. His face was pale and gaunt, his stubble unkempt, and his bloodshot eyes gave him the look of a man who hadn't slept in days. I'm sorry, he muttered repeatedly, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, my voice cold and detached. Apologies are meaningless. They only serve to ease the guilt of the person offering them. You don't deserve that. Diana and her mother had driven mine out of our home. Their greed was in their blood. In the end, they won, taking my father and everything I held dear. But I refused to lose, not for my mother's sake. She'd been cast aside, sinking into despair, until she ended her life alone in an empty house. My words left him stunned, but I didn't wait for a response. During my hospital stay, Matthew remained by my side, ensuring that I was comfortable and well cared for. Harvey, on the other hand, tried calling and messaging me incessantly, but I ignored every attempt. Matthew later informed me that Harvey had visited the hospital several times but couldn't bring himself to face me. Diana, however, had no such reservations. One day she stormed into my hospital room, her anger radiating off her in waves. Her eyes burned with fury as she hurled accusations at me. "What did you tell Harvey? He's ignoring my calls. Everything I've lost is because of you, Jennifer. You'll never know peace. Harvey is mine," she screamed. Remaining calm, I met her enraged gaze with an impassive expression. "If you've lost your sanity, go scream somewhere else. Everything happening to you now is a result of your own choices." Her composure shattered as she screamed incoherently and lunged at me. I didn't flinch, a mocking smile forming on my lips. She was too consumed by rage to notice the sound of approaching footsteps outside the door. Harvey entered just as she raised her hand to strike me. "Diana, stop," he commanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. He stepped between us and grabbed her arm, his eyes full of concern as he turned to me. "Jennifer, are you all right?" I said nothing, my cold stare fixed on the scene. Diana clung to Harvey, her voice trembling as she played her final card. "Harvey, why won't you answer my calls? Don't you love me anymore? Have you forgotten she pushed me down the stairs?" The next day, Diana invited me to meet. On a warm afternoon, we sat on wicker chairs at a cafe terrace. She looked as stunning as ever, her long hair cascading behind her and her dress flowing gracefully with every step. Her desperation was almost comical. Harvey's expression hardened, and with a swift motion, he shook her off. "Diana, I've had enough of your lies. You used me to hurt Jennifer, and I was wrong to trust you," he said harshly. Diana crumpled to the floor, sobbing hysterically. "Harvey, you promised you wouldn't leave me. Take me to the doctor, please." Harvey's patience snapped. He threw a wad of cash at her feet, his voice cold. "Take it and leave. I don't want to see you again." The insult cut deeper than any physical blow. Humiliated, Diana stumbled out of the room, her defeat absolute. In the following days, Harvey stayed by my side at the hospital, undeterred by my frosty indifference. When my condition improved and I was discharged, he took me home, carrying me inside as though we were reliving the best moments of our marriage. Harvey rarely went to his office anymore, preferring to stay close to me. Whether working from home or accompanying me on outings, he seemed determined not to let me out of his sight. Yet, each time I brought up the divorce papers, his expression filled with anguish. It was as if every mention was another wound to his heart. As winter approached, I received an update from Matthew about the company's progress. Along with the news, he included information about my father and Diana's family. My father's business had collapsed due to mismanagement, and he was now working as a laborer in a warehouse. Diana's mother had developed severe depression and was dependent on medication. Diana herself was bouncing between jobs, unable to hold on to anything for long. "Jennifer, how have you been these past 2 years?" she asked, blinking her wide eyes in feigned innocence. Closing my laptop, I deleted the message without a second thought. I left Matthew a note explaining that there was no longer any reason to follow up on them. The matter had been resolved. Their suffering, no matter how severe, could never equate to the lives lost, my mother's and my child's. I was done pursuing revenge. I felt utterly drained. That evening, Harvey returned home bundled in a thick coat, snow clinging to his hair and shoulders. He pulled a warm roasted sweet potato from his pocket and offered it to me as though it were some precious gift. Once he had driven through the night to bring food to Diana. Now he trudged through snow to offer me something instead. He was doing everything he could to show he cared, but the harder he tried, the less it mattered to me. I dropped the sweet potato, letting it hit the floor with a dull thud, splitting apart like wet clay. Harvey stood still, staring at the mess for a few seconds, before silently kneeling to clean it up, his hand steady despite the sticky residue. Harvey, I said, my voice calm but firm. There's nothing left between us. Staying together will only make the pain last longer. Let's get divorced. I wasn't seeking his redemption. I wanted him to live with his guilt for the rest of his life. Panic flashed in his eyes as he grabbed my hand with a desperate grip. His usually composed gaze was now frantic and pleading. "Don't leave me," he begged, his voice trembling. I had seen that look before, 2 years ago when Diana learned she could never play the piano again. He had worn the same expression back then. He was starting to care for me now, but it was far too late. "Jennifer, I was wrong," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please give me another chance. Let me take care of you." Tears streamed down his face, hot and startling as they landed on the back of my hand. "2 years ago," he continued, his words catching in his throat, "I didn't see you push Diana. I only saw her fall. I believed her lies and sent you to prison. I killed our child." I pulled my hand away. "Finally admitting you were wrong took you long enough," I said coldly. Harvey collapsed to his knees, his composure utterly shattered. "I love you, Jennifer," he cried. "I always have. I was blind, mistaking Diana for you. What I felt for her was gratitude, not love. Please don't divorce me. I'll do anything to fix this." I looked at him, his eyes bloodshot and his voice hoarse from desperation, and then I laughed, a cold, sharp sound. I smirked coldly. Her words were like knives, cutting deep. "Harvey," I said, my tone icy and controlled, "get out." He left, not just the house, but everything. Harvey turned himself in, confessing that he had lied in court 2 years earlier and had given false testimony. Before serving his prison sentence, he called and left a message I never answered. "Jennifer, I don't expect you to forgive me. I deserve everything that's happened. I'll pay for my mistakes. Please take care of yourself." Later, I went to court and finalized the divorce. When the ruling was issued, Harvey and I officially became strangers. "Harvey has taken such good care of me while you were gone. You're not jealous, are you?" she added playfully, tilting her head. 2 years after my sentencing, I stepped out of the prison gates with nothing but a small bag of belongings. The night before, a fellow inmate had advised me not to dwell on the past, but I broke that promise. I couldn't help it. I had lost too much. Harvey greeted me in a new car. Sitting in the passenger seat, I inhaled the faint aroma of chamomile. It felt as though I had stepped into another life. "Do I need to buy some clothes?" I asked softly. The red dress I wore was 2 years old and slightly worn. Harvey responded with a quiet H and drove off without another word. "What do you want?" I asked, unwilling to waste time. Diana dropped the pretense. "Fine. I'll be direct. I hope you divorce Harvey soon. We'll make sure you're compensated enough to live comfortably, whether here or abroad." "This isn't your place to discuss," I replied flatly. A mistress had no right to talk about my marriage. "You two don't love each other anymore. Staying together is just torture. What's the point?" she asked, her wide eyes almost accusatory. And suddenly everything became clear to me. 2 years ago, she had done the same thing, intentionally provoking me while she went on about how deeply she and Harvey loved each other, even claiming they had already been intimate. Back then, I let her words enrage me, lost control, and fell right into her trap. When Harvey arrived, he found her falling down the stairs. The doctor's report revealed multiple fractures and an injury to her hand, which meant she would never be able to play the piano again. Her mother sued me. My father was furious, and my husband testified against me. They all worked together to have me imprisoned. I tried to defend myself, but it was futile. Now, I picked up my coffee and splashed it straight into her face. The coffee dripped down her once flawless face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. Her long hair stuck to her cheeks, and a stain spread across her white dress. She looked a mess, and for once it was satisfying to me. I couldn't stand the sight of her. She was the last person who had any right to discuss divorce with me. "And what's the point?" she asked. "Well, at least it's better than being a mistress," I replied with a smirk, adjusting the loose dress on my frame. Diana's face turned pale as her facade finally cracked. She stood up quickly, raising her hand as if to slap me. I grabbed her wrist and slapped her instead. The bright red mark from my hand bloomed on her cheek. Smiling, I leaned in close, not pretending anymore. "You want to hit me? Did you think I'm still the Jennifer from 2 years ago? Diana, don't mess with me again." With that, I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard her whining into the phone, no doubt calling Harvey. How ridiculous. It was as if she were still playing childish games. That evening, Harvey returned home. I expected him to confront me, since Diana's delicate whimpering voice had always been his weakness, and he had never hesitated to take her side. But I was wrong. Instead, Harvey hired a housekeeper, and that night she prepared a lavish feast with chicken, fish, and beef. Dish after dish, I ate until I was uncomfortably full. My stomach was bloated, aching. In the bathroom, I clung to the toilet, retching until tears filled my eyes. At the mall, I picked out a white dress. While the sales assistant chatted about how it fit, I just smiled and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The dress hung loosely on my thin body. I was too skinny to fill it out properly. Still, I bought it, just as I had stubbornly married Harvey 2 years ago, knowing he loved someone else. Harvey glanced at me, his lips twitching as if to comment. In the past, he would have bluntly said, "Jennifer, that dress doesn't suit you." But today, he said nothing, merely pulling out his card to pay. "Why are you eating like this?" Harvey frowned, handing me some digestion medicine. His gaze was warm and soft, like the dim light spilling from the bedroom. I swallowed the pill dry without water, a skill I'd learned in prison. I used to think the pill would get stuck, but when you have no one to care for you, every complaint feels small. Harvey didn't know this. He didn't know how, after 2 years of prison food, my taste buds craved flavorful meals, even though my stomach couldn't handle them. He didn't know anything about what I'd been through. His eyes were always focused on Diana. "If you're here to question me about Diana, don't bother," I said, regaining my composure. "Just keep her in check and keep her away from me." I looked at him coldly. Harvey froze, his brows furrowing. He exhaled slowly but said nothing. That night, he didn't sleep in the same bed as me. He claimed he had work to do and stayed in the study. By the time I fell asleep, he still hadn't come to bed. In the middle of the night, the sound of a door closing woke me. I was a light sleeper now, and when I glanced at the clock, it was past 2 a.m. Half an hour later, Diana posted on social media a spread of decadent dishes, captioned, "Thank you for comforting me." Zooming in on the photo, I immediately recognized Harvey's hand, his wedding ring gleaming on his fourth finger. My husband had snuck out in the middle of the night to buy food for another woman and keep her company. Comfort her about what? The coffee I spilled on her? The slap I gave her? I could almost picture her smug smile, basking in her sense of victory. The next morning, I received a message from Harvey reminding me to take my medication. He added that he had scheduled a health checkup for me and planned to accompany me. I almost laughed. I thought he couldn't wait for me to disappear from his life. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, I looked at my fragile frame. My hands moved from my cheeks, tracing the sharp lines of my collarbone, down to the ribs visible beneath my skin, and finally resting on my flat stomach. 2 years ago, I had dreamed endlessly of having a child with him, but now, as my trembling hands stopped, I replied, "I'll go to the checkup myself. You don't need to come." I was no longer the Jennifer who depended on him for everything. From now on, I would reclaim everything that was rightfully mine, piece by piece. Their time of indulgence was over. My mother came from a powerful business family. When she married, my grandparents gave her several companies and parcels of land as her dowry, which she kept firmly under her control. After her death, she left it all to me. During my 2 years in prison, I reached out to the people my mother had trusted in her lifetime to manage the core assets. As for the other companies, I didn't have the energy to manage them all. My father took advantage of that and seized several for himself. His success over the years had been built on my mother's dowry and the connections from her family, yet he showed no gratitude. Once he achieved his goals, he started keeping mistresses and fathered an illegitimate daughter. I called Matthew. "Do we need to meet?" Matthew was 10 years older than me, someone my mother had personally mentored. He had frequently visited me in prison and worked quietly in my father's shadow. "Jennifer, here's what I've gathered over the years," he said, handing me a thick stack of documents. "Evidence of your father's affairs and his embezzlement through selling company shares. Take a look." I skimmed a few pages and smiled. "Thank you, Matthew. These papers are invaluable. They were the first step in my counterattack against my father and his family." "No need to thank me, Jennifer," Matthew said with a relieved sigh. "What matters is that you found the strength to fight back." The red dress was another thing we silently agreed on. It was no longer wanted. It was the same dress I had chosen for Harvey's birthday, the day I was arrested. Back then, it had been beautiful and vibrant. Now it seemed utterly lifeless. That afternoon, Matthew insisted on accompanying me to my health checkup, citing my mother's kindness to him as his reason for wanting to repay the favor. I couldn't refuse, so I agreed. What I didn't expect was to run into Harvey outside the hospital after the checkup. The moment he saw me with Matthew, he froze. Jennifer's voice carried a hint of suspicion as she spoke softly. "Is this why you didn't want me to come with you?" Harvey's brows furrowed, irritation etched across his features. "Think whatever you want," I replied dismissively before turning to Matthew with a smile. "Matthew, could you drive me home?" Without hesitation, he agreed. "Of course." I didn't spare Harvey another glance. That evening, Harvey returned home, loosening his tie as he entered the bedroom. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he said, "Jennifer, can we talk?" But I was too drained from the day and pretended to sleep. Not responding, I heard him exhale quietly before silence filled the room. 2 years ago, when I discovered his affair with Diana, I'd wanted to talk too, but what had he done? Nothing, just silence. How ironic. 2 weeks after my release, my father asked to meet. Since my mother's death, I hadn't been back to that house. It was no longer a home. Taken over by others, it felt foreign, so he arranged for us to meet outside. I expected a polite conversation, maybe some familial concern. Instead, his first words were sharp criticism. Understandably, he had reasons to worry. I had begun contacting the trusted individuals my mother once worked with. "Jennifer, why are you suddenly trying to reclaim those companies? Are you out of money?" His cold, cutting words sliced through the air, but I had grown used to worse during my imprisonment. After 2 years without seeing each other, he hadn't changed a bit. I smiled faintly, standing to pour tea, my mother's favorite blend, and served it to him, hoping it might calm him, though knowing what I was about to say would provoke his anger. "I don't need money, I simply want to take back what Mom left for me." My tone was steady, my gaze fixed on his face, noting each flicker of emotion. "You're just a girl, Jennifer, and you've been in prison. Trusting you with these companies? I can't do that. Besides, I'm managing important projects right now. If you want to take over, you'll have to wait until they're finished." He emptied his teacup in a single gulp, slamming it onto the table with a resounding thud, a clear warning. I chuckled softly at his naivety. Did he really think I wouldn't see through him? By the time his so-called projects were completed, the assets would likely be drained, leaving me with worthless remnants, perhaps even debt. At home, Harvey sat cross-legged, his lips pressed together as though weighing his words. He soon spoke. "We're getting a divorce. I've consulted a lawyer about dividing the assets. Let me know if there's anything specific you want." His tone was distant and professional. "Dad, I might be young, but I'm capable of learning." Reaching into my bag, I retrieved a pile of photos and documents. "You should probably look at these first." He hesitated, but a single glance made his expression darken. Flipping through the papers, his face grew increasingly sour with every page. By the time he finished, he glared at me with blazing eyes. If we hadn't been separated by the table, I was certain he would have hit me. "Jennifer, where did you get these?" His voice trembled as he stood abruptly, pale as a ghost. The table quivered under the weight of his anger, but I remained seated, meeting his fury with calm defiance. "You don't need to know the source," I replied. "When your company was about to go public years ago, Mom already had evidence of your affairs, the houses, cars, and money you gave to Diana and her mother. All of it came from Mom's contributions to the marriage. She could have taken it all back at any time." His panic was visible. He realized that the evidence in my possession could ruin his reputation, his company, and everything he had built. If this became public, the fallout would be devastating. "But she didn't," I continued. "Instead, she chose to protect your image as a loving husband. And what was her reward? She was thrown out of her home, left to battle depression alone until it ultimately consumed her. The things Mom had left behind, he had enjoyed them long enough. Now it was time to return them." I smiled, though my eyes burned with suppressed emotion. For so long, I thought my mother had been weak for letting Diana and her mother trample over her. Now I realized she wasn't weak. She had simply loved the wrong person. The saddest thing is a woman sacrificing herself for someone undeserving. Even after her death, my father continued leeching off her. Her legacy didn't belong in the hands of people like him. It would only tarnish her memory. My father's body trembled. At his age, with so much at risk, losing everything would destroy him. Quietly stepping back was his only choice. Dad, I'm sure you'll agree with me, I said, my voice firm. If not, perhaps you should review the company's accounting records over the years. They're quite revealing. Why, I asked, even though I already knew. I wanted him to say it. 2 years of endurance had left no room for compromise, not even for him. You... His voice wavered. For a moment I thought I saw tears, but I knew better than to believe he felt remorse for my mother or guilt toward me. This was the same man who had testified against me in court without hesitation, ensuring my imprisonment. After a long pause, he sighed deeply. I'll arrange the handover. I expect the original documents in return. His face was grim, his glare sharp as knives. Grabbing his coat and bag, he turned to leave, but paused at the door, his gaze cold and disdainful. Jennifer, you truly are my daughter, ruthless and unscrupulous. Don't forget how you managed to marry Harvey in the first place. I had hoped you'd change, but someone who could harm her own sister would never value family. I rose with grace, my demeanor polite but my words cutting. Thank you, Dad. Everything I know, I learned from you. The door slammed shut with a deafening echo. I had succeeded in driving him away, leaving me alone to savor my tea. It was too good to waste. If Mom was watching from above, I hoped she felt some peace knowing her legacy was no longer in the hands of those who didn't deserve it. Diana, however, had been bombarding me with vulgar, hateful messages, likely instigated by my father. Diana must have told her something, or maybe it was simply because Harvey still hadn't finalized our divorce, leaving her more frustrated by the day. Her facade of being a sweet, harmless girl was gone, replaced by relentless harassment. It was draining. I finally sent her a single text. Send me one more message and I'll forward everything to Harvey. The silence that followed was immediate. Perfect. That was exactly the reaction I wanted. Let her experience just a fraction of what I'd endured back then. This kind of justice felt far more satisfying than simply taking something away from her. When I returned home, the housekeeper Harvey had hired had already prepared dinner. At first, she had carefully adjusted my meals, slowly reintroducing richer, more flavorful dishes to help me adjust without upsetting my health. She must have noticed how often I sat by the window, lost in thought, because she began opening up about her own family troubles, as though searching for solidarity in shared struggles. That day, Matthew called to inform me that he had compiled all the documents related to my father's companies, ready for my review. My father had acted swiftly, likely fearing I might truly ruin his reputation if he delayed. Feeling unusually cheerful, I invited Matthew to bring the files to my house. Diana has waited too long for me. I don't want to let her down, he admitted, avoiding my gaze. For a moment, I caught a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. These are the financial accounts for the companies, Matthew explained upon his arrival. There's a lot to go through, so it'll take some time. I've highlighted the key sections for you. He had also brought food, adding, I remember Madam once said you liked fried eggs, so I had some made for you. Fried eggs. My mother used to make them for me so often. I froze momentarily before murmuring, thank you. Picking up the chopsticks, I took a bite. The taste wasn't the same, but the sentiment touched me deeply, and my eyes stung as memories of her came rushing back. I missed her more than words could express. Jennifer, are you inviting people into the house now? Harvey's voice sliced through the moment like a knife. I looked up, meeting his sharp gaze as it darted to Matthew. His clenched jaw and stormy expression revealed his inner turmoil. Matthew instinctively stepped between us. Matthew, you should leave, I said calmly. I'll call if I need anything. After Matthew departed, Harvey grabbed my wrist and pressed me against the entryway wall. His grip was firm, his breath hot with restrained fury. Is this what you're doing now? He asked, his tone venomous. You refuse to divorce me, yet you're bringing men into our home? Is this some sort of game? Divorce me already? His words dripped with anger. Name your price. I don't care what it is. His eyes burned with fury, his voice trembling as he struggled to contain his emotions. The absurdity of his anger made me smirk. Divorce? Sure, but tell me, does it have to be Diana? My voice was light but mocking. Harvey had always had feelings for Diana, perhaps even loved her. But when I looked into his eyes, I couldn't see the depth of that love. What had Diana done to make him so desperate to leave me? You wouldn't understand, he said bitterly. Diana saved my life. Feigning interest, I raised an eyebrow. Oh, how? Harvey continued, his voice softening as he recounted the memory. During a high school study tour, I had a severe allergic asthma attack. Diana carried me to the hospital. She was so small, yet she carried me the entire way. I owe her everything for that. I can't abandon her. My heart sank like a stone. I could picture it, a teenage boy struggling to breathe and a petite girl desperately trying to help. But it wasn't Diana. I wanted to laugh, not out of humor, but at the sheer irony. That day, I had been the one to save him. Diana had taken one look at Harvey, gasping for air, and fled in fear. It was my first day out of prison, and my husband wanted a divorce. I didn't feel sad. Perhaps I had gone numb after being hurt so deeply 2 years ago. You still think I pushed Diana down the stairs? I murmured. I wasn't defending myself, just stating the accusation I couldn't fight against. Harvey was silent for a moment before replying, It's all in the past. Diana doesn't hold it against you anymore. This was his punishment for being blind, for falling for someone so manipulative, and I had no intention of enlightening him. Touching story, I said with a sneer, but I'm not agreeing to a divorce. I've already told you. The timing is up to me. Harvey's expression darkened as his anger boiled over. You spent 2 years in prison, yet you two stayed in contact? Yes, I said coldly, watching his stunned expression. Don't look at me like that, I continued. If Diana saw your face right now, she might think you actually care about me. Don't flatter yourself, he growled, turning away as he released my wrist. You hurt Diana. I could never have feelings for you. I laughed, a hollow sound. Hurt her? Did you see me push her? Which hand did I use, left, right, or both? His confidence wavered for a split second. You didn't see anything, I pressed on. You just saw Diana fall down the stairs and believed whatever she told you. You're a fool. Let me ask you, are you sure Diana saved you? Is she really your savior? His silence spoke volumes. Finally, he forced out, I believe what I saw. Predictable, I smiled faintly. Good for you. Of course she didn't. Diana had everything she wanted. Why would she hold a grudge? Of course, I said coldly. After all, my father loves her, you love her. Why would she blame me? My smile was bitter, my tone icy. Even though Diana's mother had been a mistress, even though she had taken both my father and my husband, Diana had no reason to resent me. In a sudden burst of rage, Harvey grabbed the remote and smashed it against the floor before storming out, slamming the door behind him. This wasn't the end, just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, I focused on sorting the company accounts. With Matthew's help, I contacted veteran employees and organized a shareholder meeting. Soon I had regained control of the companies my father had seized, replacing his allies with my own trusted team. During this time, my days followed a simple routine of work and home. Matthew was constantly by my side, assisting me in reclaiming everything my mother had left behind, including the company my father had given to Diana. Naturally, Diana complained to Harvey, who eventually stormed into the underground parking lot of my office. His expression was thunderous as he spotted me with Matthew. Take it out on me if you must, I said calmly, but stop hurting. Diana demanded the company be returned to her. I laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through her. Diana had stolen the company my mother left me, and I was simply reclaiming what was mine. How could that possibly be hurting her? Jennifer, she said, I'll agree not to divorce you, but the company— Before I could respond, Matthew interrupted Harvey with a tone dripping in amusement. What a proposition, he said. Trading a marriage for a company. Do you truly believe you're worth that much? Harvey's face contorted with rage, his expression growing darker by the second. It was oddly satisfying. Jennifer, let me take you home, Matthew said, stepping in front of me to block Harvey's gaze. There's no need to stick around and listen to such nonsense. Thank you, Matthew, I replied, ignoring Harvey entirely as I climbed into Matthew's car. There was still plenty left to do, and Harvey could wait.